Well, I think really I always wanted to be an engineer. I was one of those kids that used to take my toys apart, could never quite get them back together again, but I was fascinated by figuring out how all these things worked. And then, I suppose back in 1978, my dad, he bought an Apple II computer. He gave it to me and said, figure out how to program this thing and automate my business. And I remember playing with this machine, and I figured out somehow how to program. And I just remember thinking, how could you ever get bored of a computer? It can be anything that you want it to be. And of course I got into computing, and then I got into the whole Silicon Valley thing as well. I used to suck up everything I could over there. Stephen Jobs and Wozniak were my heroes. I used to subscribe to computer magazines like Byte and Dr. Dobbs' Journal of Computer Calisthenics, whatever that means. But no, I was just a junkie for it all. And lo and behold, I wanted to be a sort of run a tech startup just as soon as I could. By the early 80s, my dad's business was beginning to struggle, and I kind of played safe. So I went off to university and I studied computer systems, and my dad sort of carried on. By this stage he had actually started a computer company as well as his travel business, but we kind of went our separate ways, and I got more and more into the scientific aspects of computing. So I guess after I graduated I went and joined, it was BAE Systems to begin with, very large company, and I joined their central R&D labs. And it was amazing. I was working on missile guidance systems. I did 5 years at British Aerospace, and I think I'd kind of learned what I needed to know. And then I went and joined Lucas Industries up in the Midlands, and they were a tier 1 system supplier. They used to make brake systems, diesel engine controls, and I joined their R&D labs. And it was just a fantastic period, because it was that point in time when everything in automotive was being made electronic, and I knew how to program, I knew how to do things like control engineering, and I was at the right place at the right time. And we just developed lots and lots of different products. So we developed traction control, car dynamics control, electric power assisted steering, and I guess the things that I'm probably most proud of, because they were so sophisticated, was things like adaptive cruise control. We've actually got adaptive cruise control on this car, and what that meant, well, it capitalized on my experience in aerospace. So I sort of brought in the radar technology so that we could measure how far it was to the car in front, and then the car could slow down if you got too close to the car in front. It was a fabulous time. I joined the automotive industry at an incredible time. Just the period when everything was going electronics from what was a very electrical and mechanical industry. So, it was a long line of product. But we just take this car here, this BMW. It's got some of the products that I developed on it. So, for instance, it's got my adaptive cruise control. This is just fantastic. So what I do with this, I just press this, set my speed, and let's take that car in front, and it keeps me at my set speed. Oh, this car's disappearing. So I've set it for 75 miles per hour. And now it will slow down in front of that car. It's incredible. So I can just take my feet off the pedals, and I did this. I worked in a European project. We collaborated with a lot of the universities and car companies across Europe. I used my radar skills from aerospace, and integrated it. And I have to say, on this BMW, it's a pretty flawless implementation. I remember when I used to take this out in the 90s, and it was much more nerve-wracking, wondering, is it going to react, but it's great. You can change the time interval. I can it'll now bunch up a little bit with the car in front. It's absolutely incredible. And of course, if you do get too close, whether it's on or not, it will do an emergency stop. So it's got collision avoidance. And then another innovation which is quite fun is it measures where the lane markings are. So if I try and cross the lane without indicating, you can just feel it. It imitates the rumble strip warning. And of course, if you indicate, you don't get that. So you get this haptic feedback in the steering wheel that tells you you're leaving your lane. So it stops you from going to sleep, for instance. So it's quite fantastic. It's also got on here a head-up display. Now, we didn't develop the head-up display, but we did work with the company that did. It was a British company called Pilkington, and now this is a beautiful implementation. It's kind of obvious about the technology development aspect, creating new innovations in the product. But what isn't so obvious is learning who is the right market for the right product. So you've almost got to learn two things at once. You've got to learn what's the right market niche, and then what's the right feature set in the product for that market niche. And of course, you're trying to find a situation where you find a market niche who've just got to have that combination of features, but then as soon as they have started to understand it, they kind of tell other people, and then it spreads from one niche to another and eventually takes over a whole market. But it's just as important learning the customer element as it is trying to develop the technology. I always had this hankering for creating my own startup. It never really went away, and I suppose if I hadn't had so much fun developing all these new products, I never would have thought about it. But by about the end of the late 90s, with globalization, the automotive industry was changing hugely. We kept merging with other companies, being bought by companies, buying companies, and one thing led to another, and of course R&D labs were being closed. So my job had moved from creating innovative new products to closing down R&D centres. And although I was head of automotive R&D, it wasn't a very satisfying job, and it certainly wasn't what I wanted to do. It's very hard trying to get funding. Sometimes it's harder to get external funding than it was to get internal funding. But the tactic that I learned was to engage with customers really early. I used to look for customer problems, and our customers were the big car companies, BMW, Mercedes, Jaguar cars, Ford, Renault, and what we would do, I would look for a problem, and then with some very modest funding, I would sort of propose a solution. I would get the customer hooked. To begin with, they thought it was rubbish, but then I'd take it back and show a slight improvement. And with that engagement came commitment from the customer. And then with that commitment came my own company prepared to invest in it for production purposes. I mean, the car company would often pay for a prototype, but they wouldn't pay for your whole development. And with the money from a prototype, I would gear that up with grant funding, And then when we would be getting into sort of mainstream development to turn it into an automotive product, my own company would pay for that. But if we didn't have the customer pulling right at the start, we'd never have got funding. Although as I said, I had this hankering for creating a startup, in some ways I was like a sort of technopreneur or intrapreneur rather than entrepreneur. So I was working within a company, I was playing the system, I was getting funding from outside, I was getting funding from inside. We had our own engineering teams, we were putting it all together and then seeing products coming through the pipeline, and I think, yeah, I did that. It was fantastic. By the late 90s, with globalization, we kept merging with companies, buying companies, being bought by companies, and gradually what was happening is you'd end up with too many R&D labs. So what would happen is they'd get closed down, and I guess I got a bit tired of closing down R&D labs rather than actually developing new products. So I kind of felt it was time to move on. So I moved on and I went into a different industry. This was now by about 2000. It was the peak of the dot-com boom. And I moved into the financial industry and I joined a company called Delarue, who made banknotes and ATMs and cash machines. And it was quite an exciting period because with the introduction of the euro in 2 years, they needed to develop a lot of new products as well as making something like €500 million banknotes. So head down, 2 years, harnessing about 260 people, developing lots and lots of products. And that first period was very exciting. But then really, as soon as we launched all our machines and banknotes, it was a bit like Y2K. The industry kind of went through a euro hangover. The banks had overstocked on all of Delarue's equipment and they weren't buying anything. So in some ways I was right back to where I was in the automotive industry. First of all, I was asked to reduce the team from about 260 people to 130 people, and somewhere in that process I was given my marching orders as well, and I had to leave with a redundancy package. And yeah, it was a bit of a crisis, really. I guess I'd been working in large companies in research and development for about 22 years. I was a little bit institutionalized. I mean, it was really a fantastic opportunity to go and scratch that itch and to create my own startup, although I wasn't absolutely sure what I was going to do in the first instance. Although I had a generous payout, it wasn't really enough to start a business. It was enough to keep our family going for about 6 months. And my personal costs were quite high then. I had 3 kids in private school. We had a menagerie of animals. We weren't very mobile. I freaked a little bit. I got worried, and I did try and get a job locally to where we were living. But when I said what my dot-com salary was, they just laughed. So instead, I thought, well, the easiest thing to get into is probably consulting. People say to you, well, who do you work for? And you feel so on your own. I work for myself, you can just feel them saying, loser. But it was interesting because what I did was I wanted to consult in the area of new product development, and I knew the customers I understood best were large companies, so I had to get back there. So I sort of approached it in the same way that I did innovation in automotive. I went out, I talked to a number of potential customers, got engaged, I asked them what were their issues, what were their problems, try and work out what was most pressing, And I would then give them a call and said, I've been thinking about, what you told me last week, and I wonder if, if this might be the way for you to go. And of course they'll say, no, that's not going to work, but what about this? And after a while, you kind of jointly evolve the solution, just like we used to do in automotive when we were developing products. And before I knew where it was, I'd been engaged by them. And I kept doing this, basically, working for, massive companies like Siemens and Toshiba. Of course, my old company, Delarue. I went and did stuff in the automotive industry for Delphi Automotive. And bit by bit, I gradually built up a consulting business. And we were very focused in the type of consulting. It was this new product development and the strategies around that. I did a very slow start. I mean, I suppose in my first year, I only turned over £28,000. And then in the second year, I started getting good at it. It was about £176,000. And then in the third year, I was getting better at it. It was £660,000. And then I started taking on people, and lo and behold, we were turning over millions. But it was the same process. I call it actually now the unicorn blueprint. And, it's a good way for coming up with an innovative product or service that's very focused on your customers' problems. Financial crash, yes, like everybody else, we wobbled a bit, but really the main thing that it did was it obsoleted my main service, which was new product development, because back in 2010 people didn't want to develop new products, they were just trying to survive. So I used the same approach and migrated the offer into ChangeManage, and we pulled through. Now look, I love innovation. I love new things. But as much as I like the new, it's also important for me to see a product accepted by the marketplace. This doesn't happen by accident. It's as much to do with research and experimentation in the marketplace as it is with the development of new technology. In fact, many innovations require no new technology. Trying to learn the ideal feature set and its fit to the right marketplace is a double learning problem. You either don't bother and instead model your business on one that is already working. The results are limited, but you get to play safe. Or you innovate and set yourself up for a program of rigorous experimentation where you systematically learn all these unknowns. And when your innovation does take off, the rewards are fantastic. And besides, you get to change the world. Now, how did I do that? I can't remember designing this feature. Whoa, that's a big drop down there. In the next video, I'm going to describe the program for finding your next big thing. Till then.